Well, we did it, Eva. We're doing it. We're doing the Leaders Who Care series. Even with my mini updates at the last moment, we are here. So welcome to the Leaders Who Care series.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. My pleasure. And shout out to my brother, my partner, Ed, for actually connecting us in an interesting way. And so I appreciate that. And best way to start, always the best way to start, is if you could introduce yourself briefly. Don't get to the business stuff yet. Just talk about like where are you now? Where are you from? A family. If you want to tell everybody your favorite color, that's cool if you want to. Maybe something you've never told anybody and you want to reveal it to the world now. That'd be so
Ooh.
cool. Something really semi-earth shattering. But tell
Yeah.
us who Eva is.
I love that, and I hate to disappoint without having some juicy secret to reveal. But I'm Eva. I'm Eva Goulbourne. I am a wife and a mother of two. I am a middle child and a lefty, meaning, and I always like thinking about my middle child identity and my lefty identity very much come out in more than you know, maybe in some of the rest of the conversation that we're going to have. But I'm also the CEO and founder of Littlefoot Ventures, and I am a foodie to the nth degree, so much so that I've dedicated my entire professional career to food and food systems. I'm currently based out in Boulder County, Colorado, but I am an East Coaster through and through, for better or for worse. Originally from Massachusetts and now in the Rocky Mountains.
So Boulder, Colorado. Did you ever see the Mork and Mindy show?
Yeah, I saw that in your notes. Is that based here? I guess I never.
No, it was. I'm older than you,
Okay.
unfortunately. But Mork and Mindy was that was Robin Williams' first big TV show,
No, that's so crazy.
and hilarious. And I fell in love with Pam Dauber, who was Mindy when I was younger, and everything. So every city has a thing that brings it to fame, you know. So
Yeah.
um, since we're talking a little bit about younger, and you mentioned we talked earlier about it's your eldest is going to be 5 years old. Um, what were you like as a kid or a teenager? You talk about being a foodie. Did you eat all your vegetables, or did you feed it to the dog? Did you watch movies? You probably didn't watch Mork and Mindy when you were a kid? That was way too young. But or did you play sports? Did you play music? What were you doing?
Yeah, I love that question. I a terrible athlete. I was never particularly good in the realm of music. But I really have been a foodie since day one. So much so that I guess it depends on which vegetable it was. I may have not fed it to the dog, but I probably was giving my parents some culinary notes on how I would have preferred them to prepare it. So I've always been really fascinated about food and cooking techniques, so much so that I remember when I was maybe 7 or 8, my request for Hanukkah and Christmas was a subscription to, it used to be called Martha Stewart Living Magazine before her jailbird days. But I was so fascinated by the Food Network and Martha Stewart and Ina Garten and the idea of creating beautiful spaces and hosting and making beautiful food and home decor and decorations. And truthfully, like from age 5 onwards, I was that kid. So not the star athlete, not the dancer, not the, couldn't be bothered to play my recorder, but I was just intrigued as to, what the chef was doing at the restaurant and what knife somebody was using, or, the difference between copper and Teflon pots, and, whatever Martha Stewart was into, I was there.
And I can see it now. As little kid or teenagers interested in what kind of knives are you using?
Yeah, I just was like such a nut for all the mechanisms going into the food world. It was just, I don't know, it's just something that has felt very innate
So
to
then,
me.
how did that translate into let's call it your educational journey to start with when you were in international affairs and conflict and security
Yeah,
school?
the short and sad answer is not at all. I had always, again, been so passionate about food and just assumed that, like, well, I'm not gonna, I'd love to be a chef, but I don't really see that as like a an actual professional career for me. Never really understood too much more about the food world. But for whatever reason, I've also always been interested in traveling and adventuring and seeing what's beyond, that hill, that road, how many stamps can I get in my passport, and really had a strong sense of wanting to be a global citizen. Because I also had the privilege of taking, for example, one of my first international trips when I was 12 years old. I think I turned 13 on the trip, took a solo trip to South Korea with a friend. And so from there, with also being really supported by my parents, for me to go off and do all sorts of wild and crazy adventures from a very young age. I just had this very strong sense of what's out there, like what is the global system like. And so I studied international affairs and conflict and security at GW. And people often ask me too, in the food world, like, well, what did you study? Like, did you do something in food systems and that sort of thing? I was like, I didn't even have that back then. Like, the closest we had was like a minor in environmental studies. So my like professional and academic world was never really trained in food. And it always had sort of just been this passion that I hope to, maybe integrate into my world at some point. But it's funny too, in 2023, my conflict and security major and that learning was probably more relevant today than ever before. All my Cold War textbooks somewhere in this office, like I might probably want to dust them off because what's going on in the world around us. But in many ways, like, it was totally irrelevant to what I do now. But it was the global perspective that has sort of been the thread through and through.
Yeah, conflict and security kind of applies now, I would say, a little bit. Um, there's I should introduce you to, there's a program, one of our nonprofit clients and allies, called Million Peacemakers, has a program called Nonflict, and it's
Ooh, I love
brilliant,
that.
and it's a great name, and we can chat about it, but it's a way to not hate people over conflict, just you have different ideas, and different ideas are great, which is
Yeah.
that's what conflict really is. So, but
And
that
I think what was attractive about that too was when you're in a conflict and security program like that, you're learning about diplomacy. And I've always found, and that's become, and even thinking about it now, that theme has become really valuable and really relevant because inevitably, diplomatic relationships, it doesn't matter whether you're a surgeon or a historian or a teacher, diplomacy always sort of comes in handy. And I just found that to be fascinating as part of that academic background.
Yeah, without a doubt, we'll talk a little bit more about related in a minute. But yeah, anything that we're doing now, you have to be able to resolve conflict, if you will. And but I do love the fact that your parents, gave you permission, for lack of a better word, to at 12 or 13 go to South Korea, one of my favorite countries, by the way. You did eat a lot of kimchi.
Oh
Um,
yeah. I mean, I was, and again, even thinking about it now, being a mother, having my own children, I'm thinking like, why the heck did they allow that? But at the same time, I did appreciate, and if you ask my parents, my dad was like, heck yeah, go for it. And my mom, was, wringing her hands like, oh God, what are we doing? But I appreciated that even amongst my three, me being a trio of siblings, that they saw adventure being a really core interest of mine, and they weren't comfortable with it, but they were like, okay, like it seems like she really needs this. And an experience like that, as you can imagine, is extremely formative. And especially at such a young age too. I mean, things that I'm even thinking about today that I saw and experienced there that I didn't have the wherewithal to sort of understand at that age, that I'm still reflecting on.
Absolutely. I had a good discussion, and won't get too offline here, but about how parents, even my parents, and going back even older, where for whatever reason, kids were out younger doing stuff. Uh,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
trusted them. They may have been wincing at home, hoping but they trusted him to go for it. And I hope you do the right thing type of thing, rather than careful, careful, careful about this and every single thing, you know?
Totally. And it feels so different now. Like I wouldn't even trust any of my kids like on the other side of this door without me, watching them. But yeah, so I'm grateful that I was part of that generation that and that was just the beginning of international solo travel when I was a child too. That sort of, gave my parents the confidence to sort of kick me back out there again, and I loved it.
Yeah, and they loved it maybe too. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now I'm thinking about it, I'm like, wait a second.
Yeah, what was the real reason here?
Yeah, yeah. But I was the one that went to the sleepaway camps and, gone for the whole summer and all that stuff. So I don't know, maybe I need to investigate that with them. But
So, somewhat of a segue here. We launched our firm, Fifth Element Group, you know, um, on the premise that leaders and their businesses, their organizations, whatever, can do way better when they're doing good. I think you clearly had an understanding of that early on, with your experiences and knowledge before joining the World Economic Forum, where so much was evolved around PPP, public-private partnerships.
yeah.
How did this evolve for you, and when did the huge arena of ag become a focus for you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and even sort of like the, inferred in the question too, you're giving me more credit in that it sounds like I took a logical path in this, in this world, which I appreciate, and sometimes it was and sometimes it wasn't. But I actually started my career in agriculture almost immediately in leaving school. I was a research assistant to a small nonprofit in Washington, D.C., that provided financial education and financial services under a huge grant from MasterCard Foundation, Nike, and it was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation back then. I think it's just the Gates Foundation today, supporting tobacco farmers in East Africa, particularly in Malawi. So it was my first foray into the development world. It sort of satisfied the global interest that I had, but it helped me to understand in some really practical ways the realities of smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. And the work that we were doing allowed me to actually travel to Kenya at the time, because the project was Kenya, Malawi, I can't remember, maybe Tanzania. And so I was actually able to sort of experience and connect to, oh yeah, food that I have on the table that I'm so passionate about. I'm like this, total gourmand and food brat. There's this entire system out there that, they happen to be tobacco farmers, which of course you don't eat, but it was, the idea of subsistence farming and just sort of understanding deeper this interrelation between, our food and agriculture system that I had never seen before.
Hmm. And talk a little bit about what you picked up with public-private partnerships as an education, or as just why that's the way to go or not.
Yeah, it's another really great question. When I started at the World Economic Forum, I was on the food security and agriculture team there, and that sort of was like a total power boost of perspective from my work previously, because I was working at a global scale. There sort of wasn't one part of the world that we weren't interacting with. And a core tenet, as you suggested, within the World Economic Forum, is public-private partnerships. And what that meant for us in the ag world was I quickly realized the role that, you've got these global CEOs of, food manufacturing companies, or, agribusiness, fertilizer commodities, and, the food and beverage guys, the beer guys. And then you have this whole other part of the ecosystem of ministers of agriculture and their whole teams, the role of other international organizations and the UN agencies, World Food Program, FAO, et cetera. And then you have this other component of farmer organizations and unions and, sort of those that speak to protecting the voice of farmers. And in the work that we did, we essentially were the platform to be able to allow conversations to happen in a pre-competitive space. You had Coke and Pepsi in the same room, Nestle with Unilever, Monsanto and Syngenta, everybody who's, fighting like cats and dogs outside of the World Economic Forum and sort of in the global arena now has to play nice, and everybody has to be aligned around this shared agenda of a food system ultimately that can feed the 9 billion people that we have to feed by 2050, done in a sustainable manner. Climate was a very small asterisk back in the day, but now it's even more of an urgent component. And I saw in real time, what it looks like to see, the director general of the UN in the room with some of the top CEOs of the Walmarts and
Yeah.
of the world and whatnot, and seeing how important it was to ensure that they bought into this pre-competitive idea, because quite literally, like, the world depends on it, and we have these business and highly competitive capitalistic principles on one hand, which drives decision making, but then on the other hand, this systems level thinking that involves partnership that's just as critical as the bottom line for these businesses. And that has fundamentally changed the way that I look at the world around me. It fundamentally changed the values that I brought to Refed, and fundamentally impacts the way that I service my clients today in my work, and the value around pre-competitive collaboration.
Well, I'm going to skip the question this way and that way a little bit. You know, we launched our firm on International Women's Day because we do a lot with SDG 5 and women and diversity, etc. So when you talk about your career and how you evolved, and some of these on purpose strategy, and some of them not just happen strategy, if you will. You are a woman. Can you describe your journey, as a woman in a world of diverse partnerships, cultures, different ways of doing business? How did you feel? How did you navigate? How do you thrive in that? Because it is and has been different. It's better, but it's still different.
Yeah, it's again, I think a really thoughtful question. When I was at the forum, it felt very important to, especially as you can imagine, being in like a pretty male dominated space. Anytime you're talking about public figures, for better or for worse, that they're disproportionately men. And one of the things that I think has guided me, consciously or not, is almost over indexing on making sure that I've been really freaking good at my job, making sure that no matter what, nobody could say anything or disregard my thinking, my approach, my ideas, because I'm a woman. And so that's, again, sort of for better or for worse, really informed the professional presentation of myself, and then in turn some of the decisions that I've made in my professional career. And then on the flip side of that too, and obviously being a woman in some ways, which is a very male dominated space of like leadership positions, but then the nonprofit world, which I also play in, is actually a very female led space. And so it's interesting, and of course these are all sort of absurd generalizations about these very complex systems, but I happen to also operate in a space that was pretty female dominated. I think what was really formative for me also was actually becoming a mother. And in becoming a mother, that's when I became increasingly unapologetic about my place in the world, and increasingly bold in the opportunities that I wanted to create for others, opportunities that I wanted to take for myself. And that's even sort of where the name Littlefoot Ventures comes from, is an ode to the little feet that were growing inside of me. Because I actually founded Littlefoot sort of the second that I became pregnant with my first child. And so it's sort of the experience of being a woman, and sort of having to overcorrect or really make sure that your value comes from, beyond just your essence as a woman, was crystallized, and then sort of booted to the curb when I became a mom, because I was like, it was just like mother's intuition, tiger mama energy, where I was like, I have to do something for my family. I have to do something for your children, for mine, and a legacy needs to be created. And I'm the woman for the job.
No, that's awesome, and it is. I can see as a man having a family, feeling that. I can imagine as a woman feeling that, and having that little foot kick you for the first time from the inside out, saying, "Get with the program, mom," or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, and just the permission that gave me to take up more space in the work that I do, and realizing how little space I was taking up in, much of my career, but now it was like, this is, a business imperative for me to act like a mother, and that means, elbowing my way to the front and being really bold about how I participate in our food system.
Yeah, good for you. I think it's fantastic. We've come a ways. There's still a ways to go, but certainly have come a ways. The fourth industrial revolution is basically about technology, AI, big now, but virtual reality, a whole bunch of stuff. And the fifth is pretty well being recognized now to be about humanity, which is the other half of why we're called Fifth Element. Actually, the first was SDG 5, and then this thing. And we focused a lot on the intersection of impact and talent to get sustainable results, and a lot on SDG 17, which is about partnerships. So we know there's a huge problem of food waste going on in the food sector,
Mhm.
here in the U.S. big time, and globally. In fact, we've got an initiative called the 100 billion meal challenge, which is about changing the whole ecosystem of food, et cetera, et cetera. As you know, I'd love for you to share about your work at ReFed, implementing food waste solutions at scale, et cetera, but also now how that's gone into Littlefoot, as founder and CEO, and where you're empowering businesses, and organizations in general to fortify the food system. Talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely, and maybe even just to mention too that my time at the World Economic Forum helped me get sort of that, inch deep, mile wide understanding of our very complex global food system. And I started to get a bit of, an itch where I felt like I was outgrowing the very limited knowledge that I had on a whole bunch of different topics. And so the universe, for a variety of reasons, led me to ReFed, which many people don't know, was actually not even an organization at the time, but it was the name of the report that a group of 13 family foundations had invested their money into trying to understand the scope and scale of the problem of wasted food in the United States. And that happened to be because one of the family offices, they had a farm. They saw firsthand, just the absurdity of the problem of wasted food. They wanted to invest in it, but they wanted their team, and this was under Jesse Fink at Mission Point Partners, initially were trying to do research on investing in the space. And then they realized, putting on their philanthropic hat, like, whoa, nobody even understands the scope and scale of the problem, let alone the investment in the solution. So we really need to scale this back and just really focus on the research. So I was on the team to basically, I my responsibility was simply to make the report as successful as possible. And it went on to become, I would argue, one of the most formative intellectual assets that we have, to help people understand, again, not only the problem of wasted food, but the report and subsequently ReFed itself really did a powerful job of helping people understand the solutions and the, sort of the investment required to implement them. So that was a really exciting chapter for me to, for better or for worse, get an encyclopedic knowledge of solutions around food waste, because then we subsequently, actually created the nonprofit, and now it's gone on to, do incredible things today. I couldn't be more proud of that team. But that was really the moment for us to understand, okay, like, we've told people that this is a problem. We've helped people understand some of the solutions. And I was at a point in my time at ReFed as well, where I had the privilege of basically doing a roadshow of helping people understand. I think I spoke on probably maybe 30 stages, in a 15-month period of just, panel after panel, webinar after webinar, helping people understand this very solvable problem. And luckily, compared to a lot of other food issues, food waste is pretty, everybody can agree that that's a problem. It's one of those things. It's easy for people to understand. It's not exceptionally political. And there was a lot of buy-in to the idea, okay, this is really something for us to do something about. But I got to a place with that too, where I was like, okay, now I have this encyclopedic knowledge of, food waste. And again, as you can imagine, it makes me really interesting at parties. Um, but I was at this point, I'm at a nonprofit, and we're interacting with foundations, and we're interacting with food companies and food service operators and all these other entities. And it's great because we're giving them information, it's public information. When you're a nonprofit, you are in service to the full system. But then all of them were like, okay, great. What do we do now? What do we do next? And it was at this moment where a lot of companies, through a commitment from the White House, were committing to 50% reduction goals. And I got to a point where I was like, man, now I want to drill even deeper. So I'd gone from like global food systems, then really got this topical expertise around food waste. And then I felt really ready to start working directly with food companies, and family offices and high net worth individuals to help them make sense of their role to play in the food waste world. And this sort of happened at a moment over the past several years where something like Project Drawdown has come out, with some really powerful research to say that reducing food waste is the number one solution for us to reduce global temperatures by 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Yes,
So for me, that's like the easiest calling card for the access point for me to be able to support anyone who touches food and or anyone who touches climate.
yeah, it's you ever see the movie Don't Look Up?
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
do you remember the part where this asteroid is coming to hit us, but the president, who has to be a woman in the movie, says something like, "I got stuff to do the next 3 weeks. Try to make an appointment," type of deal.
Yeah.
So here you got food waste, not to mention how to do farming differently and with the cattle and everything that could solve so much. And yet it's just got to be frustrating for us. It is, as for you, I'm sure too. I love the
Yeah.
part where you said it must be killer going to, I must be great at parties. That was hilarious. um, Knowing you have the solutions there, right in front, not to mention there's people starving around the world to add to that.
Exactly. And that's sort of what excites me about the problem set and solution set around reducing food waste too, because I consider it really a chameleon issue where it doesn't matter if you are interested in regenerative ag and on the production side, we've got solutions for you. If you're focused on, feeding more people and feeding more people nutritious food, we have the solutions for you. And then for those who are like, I want to make money and, and save money, food waste really is that chameleon issue that services all of those different tenets of our food system.
it's a great point, because if you can put, which is all about what we do, that the economic impact to your business will be positive by doing good on the other side, that has to happen for things to really happen. But it can, because it is right there. And so that's fantastic work you're doing, and congrats on that. And it must have been the kimchi that you ate in South Korea when you were 12 that
I
just
know all those probiotics really got me.
all that happened there. Um, Last question. In LA we say keep them wanting more, so we can do a sequel. So I guess we'll do that in LA. But in 2021, a client told me, he said, the year 2020, he said, was the year that flew by slowly. And I thought, what a great line that is. At that time, it was a great line. And now, even, it's like 2020 happened yesterday and many years ago, all at the same time. It's the weirdest
Totally.
feeling. So, with all that said and all the things gone on the last couple of years, what are you most grateful for? And also, what are you most hopeful for?
Oh, that's such a thoughtful question. I think that I am most grateful for my health and my family. And I say that also in response to, you just said your client was talking about 2020 and this time warp that we've all experienced. I gave birth during the pandemic, and I gave birth during the pandemic very early on, before, there was so many unknowns and so much fear. And I, on the one hand, was trying to focus on safely growing the second child and trying to, do what with all the things that, you want to do as you're building your family. And then at the same time, that continued urgency of this idea of the legacy that I was going to leave behind, and sort of, the focus that I needed to have on the impact that I was going to have more in our global food system. Almost to, admittedly, like it's an obsession of mine. So for that, I'm grateful for that really sharpened focus of my family and my children to provide that for me. And I think what I'm hopeful for in the future is, this idea that, and maybe sounds, a bit cliche, but there's so much more awareness about how our individual actions affect those around us, and there's so many more opportunities today for us to connect to the larger world around us, and that gives me hope for people to make decisions, make investments, create partnerships, or move throughout their professional and personal worlds, in a way that keeps people connected to both the larger impact around them, and, sort of the inner smaller purview of their own personal worlds. And that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, that's brilliant actually, and that's one place we can take care. We can have technology be really helpful to
Yeah.
us, and use
Yeah.
it the same way. Well, I'm super grateful that you're a leader who cares about food. I love eating food, but I also try not to
Yeah.
waste it. And it's funny. I remember I was asking somebody else this question. And I remember we just sit in the back of my parents' station wagon, me and my brother, me and my cousin, whatever, and waving to the cars behind. We were little kids and stuff like that. And we remember seeing people throw stuff like food onto the street and everything. And when we were younger, there wasn't all this conversation going on. But even then, we said, "Man, they're wasting that food, and where do they think it's going when like automatically, magically goes away and
Yeah.
everything?" So hopefully, we can all learn from the connectivity that you're talking about, not to do stupid things like that. So thank you for sharing everything and for being a leader who cares.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I really, really appreciate the opportunity. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.